Because as much as we love a good radical person, standing up to the system and everything like that, what I notice is a lot of people watch and support from the distance, but when those artists actually need help, when those radical artists get the consequences, so to speak, of doing that, a lot of the fan base falls silent. And I mean, the same sentiment may be said for a lot of the older artists. What's good, everybody? It's Mr. Composition and MC that writes fiction, back at it with another reaction. And this one is actually from FD Signifier. Can hip hop ever be radical again? Now, if you're new to the channel, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, notification bells on so you don't miss when I drop a new video on the road to 10K. And I thought that this subject was interesting. One being that I think that there's a difference between conscious and radical, even though nowadays I feel like consciousness is the new radical. Um, but it being a quote unquote conscious rapper myself, these are kind of like things that I've been thinking about. There's a quote by one of my favorite artists, as you can see with the painting, and this is on the track "Fear Not Man" on Black on Both Sides. And there was a particular line, and it's funny because I think that Most Def would be considered one of those radical, artists in hip hop, especially during the 90s. But there is a line that I feel like is relevant today, and Most Def has been saying relevant stuff, even with the whole Drake thing. It's so funny that that happened with the whole viral moment with Most Def, and then we have the whole freaking beef that ended up going on, and it's just all like, yeah. But he said, it goes, yo, Most, what's getting ready to happen with hip hop? Where do you think hip hop is going? I tell him, what's going to happen with hip hop? Whatever is happening with us. If we smoked out, hip hop is going to be smoked out. If we doing all right, hip hop is going to be doing all right. People talk about hip hop like it's some giant living in the hillside coming down to visit the townspeople. We are hip hop. Me, you, everybody. We are hip hop. So hip hop is going where we going. So the next time you ask yourself where hip hop is going, ask yourself, where am I going? What am I doing? And there's more as far as with the lyrics, but I feel like that was is really important as far as within the context of this. Now he's talking about radical hip hop, but I feel like it's along the same line. So let's
So a
get.
few days ago at time of recording, I did a talk at SUNY Brockport, which is, by the way, where one Professor Sky teaches hip hop and French. It was dope. It was a really good experience. People drove hours to see me, which is like humbling and wild. I'm thankful and appreciative. And it was also just a good time. And it was about hip hop, masculinity, a bunch of other stuff. But rambling, one question came up about like the true nature of hip hop and who owns it and who is served by hip hop the most. And my answer to that question was basically, sadly, the worst people possible. You might think that the recent resurgence of effort and artistic vision ushered on by people like Kendrick Lamar and Doechii means that hip hop is changing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the total reality of hip hop is really any different than what the medium has been for the last 20, 30 years. It's still very much beholden to corporate interests, and it's very much lost its radical edge that it kind of hasn't had for like 30, 40 years now. I spoke on
Yeah,
this
I
back in one of
mean,
my old videos where I basically said
yeah.
that once Run DMC signed a deal with Adidas, the game was over and corporatism had won hip hop. But at least early on, there was a lot more room for radically political hip hop music that snuck through the door before the corporations fully understood what was happening. You had people like Public Enemy, Rage Against the Machine, but those are few and far between, and even Public Enemy was low-key an accident. There's always been more underground figures then and now who truly represent radical politics. I'm thinking of Mortal Technique and Brother Ali Black. I'm thinking of Mortal Technique and Brother Ali Black. I'm thinking of Mortal Technique and Brother Ali back in the blog era. That's why that sentence is hard to say, because that was not setting myself up for success. I'm thinking Immortal Technique and Brother Ali back in the blog era. Today, to a minimal extent, maybe you could say JPEG Mafia if you stretch a little bit. But I'm more impressed with mostly unknown figures in the current hip hop landscape like Skip Coon and Infinity Knives. Infinity Knives, in fact, just released their second album. I've talked about them a while back. They're like basically what if Death Grips was a bit more accessible, which is good for me because shout out to Anthony Fantano. I never got into Death Grips. I tried. It
He
wasn't for me. It
said,
wasn't for me. I
"Shut up,
couldn't do
man."
it. Infinity Knives, though, fucks with them. And they'd probably be more prominent. They'd probably be a group you know about, if not for the fact that the first track on their new album is a song called Iron Wall, comparing Zionists to Nazis. And by the end of it,
You know, and that's what's interesting because it's funny he brought up someone like Immortal Technique, which is dope for sure. You got people like Brother Ali, and I know he's just naming a few, but it's interesting how you go from Public Enemy and Run DMC and then Brother Ali, Immortal Technique. There is so much in between there. Like I said, you got Most Def, Talib Kweli. You got a lot of actually 90s artists, the Commons. It's a good amount, not like compared to, other stuff as types of hip hop, but there's a lot in between. And I'm glad he said underground artists because more than likely that's where a lot of them are. I mean, the Mr. Lifts, um, heck, you even have people like Blueprint, a couple of people from the Rhyme Sayers, but there could be lines. That's why I was just all like consciousness versus radical hip hop, because he's talking more of the fight the power, fight the system, type of thing. But artists have been doing that. I just think, like I was saying, as far as in the beginning of this, reading those Most Def lyrics, as far as like what's going on with hip hop, it depends on, what's going on with us. And I would say so far it's I'm letting him cook, but I'm trying to see in what realm is he talking as far as radical hip hop, because even now there's artists, but some of them are not even from the United States. Some of them are not even black. You know what I mean? But they're pushing like there's artists that I've been reacting to a lot more recently, and that's someone Ren. You got someone like Easy Mills, stuff that he was spitting. I've reacted to a couple of them where he's talking about stuff that's going on where he's from, as well as, how his experience in the United States. It's there, I guess it's what I've learned getting older, where some of those songs would just find me, and or I would do a lot of research. I don't When it comes to listening to new stuff, other than the stuff that I react to, I'm not actively searching, and he brought up the blog era, and that was a big aspect of consuming a lot of new music. And some of those artists, especially in the blog era, were, I guess, what he may deem radical, So let's go back into
they
it.
taking shots at everyone from Barack Obama to Gal Gadot. And that's just the first song. And that's the same type of energy that I got from Lupe Fiasco 15 years ago when he got on stage and called out Obama for supporting Israel bombing the Gaza Strip.
Okay.
Something that
Lupe
low-key
was
cost
one
him
of
his
those.
career. I bring this up because this takes balls. This is a little different, and people are going to be mad at me. This is a much higher level gambit than Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl performance. This is showing a willingness to sacrifice larger appeal, success, possibly even careers for intentional and uncompromised political ideology. It means maybe never getting what your talent could have earned you. The hip hop industry has pretty rigid parameters on just how provocative and counterculture you can get, while also being allowed to take a chunk out of the machine. For the longest, there have been multiple measures put in place to make sure that a group like Infinity Knives stays in a very specific spot. But every once in a while, especially back in the day, like with Public Enemy, someone slips through the cracks. And I want to briefly talk about my favorite group that ever somehow snuck into the mainstream while saying some of the realest, most provocative shit you've heard in hip hop probably since the early 2000s. Dead Prez and their first album, Let's Get
Yeah.
Free, which celebrated its
Yeah.
25-year anniversary. 25.
Yeah, Dead Prez is one of those as well. And I got to open up for Dead Prez, and that was such a really cool experience. But okay, I see where he's going with that. And like I said, I've named some of those people. KRS-One would be one of those people. Dead Prez for sure is on there. Like I was saying, someone like a Mr. Lift, Blueprint, and illogic as far as with what they was doing with the dang, what was their group called? I'll put like a picture of it or whatever. But they were one of those artists as well. And my thing is, do we even is the argument that we want this to be mainstream? Is it that because at the end of the day, if we're just looking through history, I was born in the 90s and at the same time started listening to some of these artists in the 90s as well as a young age and then growing and seeing more artists. But as I've gotten older and peered through and looked at everything, like I said, with those most stuff lyrics, I feel like to really answer this question, we have to look at where we're at as a whole. And from during the 80s, the 90s, as far as the 2025, the massive amount of stuff that have gone on through there. But as far as the wide audience and the time frame where you can actively go listen to as far as any type of music that you want. A lot of these artists have a very niche fan base, and even within that, a lot of them are casual listeners. It's not like these are the same people that may be a FD signifier. Some of them are, and they are doing their thing as far as like they listen to this music, they're out actively healing or teaching the community or different things like that. But my thing would be like, how is the audience responding to this on a wide reaching, level? And if we look at a lot of what's going on, even for him to even say like, yeah, a dead prez or, someone else who would speak their mind, they may be a step more radical than a Kendrick Lamar. But at the same time, I feel like Kendrick Lamar, for some reason, has been able to penetrate and throughout his career has always stood on that kind of radicalized version. You see with some of his performance, the Black and the Baby, We Gonna Be All Right, High Power. That's just the name of few. Um, and so even within Kendrick's Super Bowl performance and him not being quote unquote as radicalized hip hop as like he mentioned as far as the Lupe Fiasco. I remember that whole ordeal, like, and the whole Lasers album and everything like that. Um, and honestly, his career really has not been the same, though he's still been able to do his own thing, which maybe ultimately what he wanted to do is just have the freedom to make the music that he's made. I don't think he's come back as far as from that. But what people were even saying with the Super Bowl performance, they was just all like, I don't want to think. Again, this wasn't the majority of people, but those sentiments, so those sentiments expand to not just other artists, but that particular field of music in general. The I don't want to think, or the I only want to turn that on when I'm out doing a protest, type of thing. So it, my thing is it when he says this, is it an artist issue or is it an audience issue? You know what I mean? When you ask a question like, can hip hop ever be radical again? I feel like are we radical? And do we want to be, does hip hop is it, I feel like hip hop was always kind of like that sword, going into battle. Like I could just imagine just this magically imbued sword, that cuts down as far as the enemies and different things like that. But have we gotten to a point where is not necessarily is the radical hip hop necessary? Because I do think that there's something, because even in the music that I create, it's like how many times, not that, but what I'm saying is how many times is the same subject matter within that. And I know it's unfair, because you could have to infinity a gazillion songs that are talk about partying and everything like that, and there doesn't seem to be a getting tired or repetitiveness of that, even though there is, but it doesn't get the same flack that, conscious music or radical music would get, like, oh, I don't want to hear this, more of this, da, 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 da. And so that's why the question is interesting, because I'm just all like, one, does the culture want that? I could say it needs it, but needs versus want is a different thing. And as we see, it's not like we could force people. This has to be something that is willingly being chosen. So, though I may love the fact that Kendrick is getting a lot of praise as far as, the type of music that he's getting, are we at a point where a lot of the culture may be closed off to that? You know what I mean? The rules have changed. The rules have changed. There was people even during this Kendrick and Drake beef that was really trying to say that Kendrick can't win the beef because he hasn't made a song that makes people dance in the club. Once I started hearing that go around and people using that, I was just all like, oh man, we're cooked. We're cooked.
Years. That album came out my senior year in high school, 25 years ago.
That's crazy.
All right. In the year 2000, Dead Prez came out of nowhere with the classic album Let's Get Free, and I still can't believe that this thing exists, but I gotta come back and do a little bit of background. M1 and Stickman actually met at FAMU, where both got deep into leftist politics, particularly the Black Panther Party. And it's hard for me to imagine like how they got into the real politics of the Black Panther Party at the time, with so much of who the Panthers were still being very, very much hidden behind cool aesthetics and aggressive imagery. To this day, the actual leftist politics of the Black Panther Party is pushed to the side. And back then, with movies like Panther or even like Forrest Gump, they were mostly just like this caricature of who they really were, and the politics of what they represented, the leftist, Marxist, Leninist politics that they followed, is mostly left out. But somehow, someway in the mid 90s, when all of this counterinsurgency would have been at its peak, Dead Prez managed to get a hold of it. And this led them to put this in their music eventually. And they were found in New York by Lord Jamar, of all people, who got them a deal with Loud Records, distributed through Columbia, which basically, I believe, is Sony Records. So as I get into some of the politics of the music, understand that this is all made with the backing of Sony Records. At the time, Loud Records was known for being the home of hardcore gangster rap, especially from New York. We're talking M.O.P., Big Pun, Wu-Tang Clan, Mobb Deep, and even some non-New York artists like 3 6 Mafia and Twista called the label home for a while. And my guess is that Lord Jamar and some other people just low-key snuck them in on that same hardcore hip-hop energy, and people weren't fully paying attention to what they were saying because they had the full backing of the machine for their first classic album. They had articles written about them in a source, all the media exposure you might expect for a buzzworthy new rap duo at this time in hip-hop history. And I think part of this was because their sound was not as New York sounding as other NY rappers at the time, which is a big deal because in the mid 90s to like the early 2000s, the South had something to say. Artists from Atlanta and New Orleans and Memphis had taken the mantle of what commercial hip hop and street rap sounded like. And at the time, New York rappers were being essentially stubborn about maintaining the New York sound, which was falling out of popularity in hip hop as a whole. But likely as a byproduct of being at the notorious party school FAMU, M1 and Stickman probably learned to appreciate Southern sounds, and you hear it in their music. The first track, I'm an African, which is one of my all-time favorite songs, sounds closer to something from Master P or Juvenile than Wu-Tang Clan. Their biggest hit, bigger than hip hop, that's like the song, not... You should know. You should know what I'm talking about. This is a bass-heavy, trunk-rattling banger that sounds nothing like what other New Yorkers were doing at the time. But that's the surface-level stuff. Understand that you've heard me use that song, I'm an African, at least twice, both during the Black Panther video and the Hotep video, because it's a song about real Pan-Africanism. I'm not going to do the full analysis of the entire album, and I'm sure that the analysis exists somewhere, but understand that the entire album gets into topics that were taboo even for hip hop. It's a truly revolutionary work. I remember being in high school and this being the first time I had ever heard a black person use the word socialist and identify as such in a positive manner. I remember going to college in the mornings where I wasn't feeling, being in school. Their song, They Schools, which is an anthem about how schools indoctrinate us, that was on heavy rotation. How this was being heavily promoted in mainstream hip hop media by Loud Records and by proxy Sony. They got the full album rollout treatment, and they were definitely pretty successful, cracking the top 100 hip hop list. The album was critically acclaimed. Dave Chappelle even used their music as the intro for his show for several years, but they also paid the price for slipping through the cracks and being that radical on their records. Loud Records went defunct and they got fully absorbed into Columbia and Sony, and troubles ensued. Their second album was shelved for 2 years, allowing their buzz to fizzle, and eventually it was released with minimal promotion. And in many ways, that was low-key the end of their relevance in the mainstream. They've managed to pop up here and there with other media projects, including a documentary on the Stars Network, but that was it. And this is why a lot of artists and even YouTubers will be very careful in how they engage with radical sentiment in their music and art, and why I will remain critical and even skeptical of some of my favorite rappers when they talk that game, because the reality is to truly talk that game and play it means putting it all on the line, and then crossing that line. It's something I balance myself, and why you should be skeptical of me at all times. And that's why I have so much respect for those artists, those rappers and others who did see that line and break right through it, like a Dead Prez or Nina Simone or Infinity Knives. Hip hop is still a genre at the margins of radical thought. It's still capable of being incredibly provocative and challenging the system and the status quo, but we can only maintain that status by remembering the true extent of what truly challenges the system in our art and what that looks like.
Before we get into that, this video is sponsored by me. Hey, if you want to dive into new music, I have a catalog. Yeah, these are not singles, these are albums. But more recently this year, I did release an album called Tame Chaos. So you can listen, stream, download, purchase, all of that in the link in the description. And just check it out because I want to see if people are actually seeing this and going to the site. So, anyways,
versus art that kind of plays into the same aesthetics but doesn't quite measure up to what the real radical art is putting on the line. So while I love those artists who do keep the culture and the energy alive, I have to pay my full respects to those who sacrifice their careers to make the real statement. I'm FD Signifier, and this has been Light Work.
and yeah, I mean, respect to them, but the thing is that, like I said, when posing this question, do you want art? Like, I understand that change isn't made without sacrifice of different things like that. But these artists that aren't the Kendrick, and different things like that, that are balancing it, I guess in some aspects, it's just all like, what do you want? Like, what more do you want as as the listener, as the fan, and different things like that? If Kendrick is balancing it and being able to still put that stuff in, all the while being able to balance and make commercial type of records, I would think Kendrick is the ultimate person who's been able to balance it and still keep his career. It seems to be even growing even more. So I guess my question to y'all and maybe even FD Signifier is amazing video, but when posing this question, what actually do you want from an artist? Do you want more artists that are almost like crashing out and being into this, socialist and, different things like that? Because as much as we appreciate those artists, they end up getting screwed over. And it doesn't mean to hide your head in the whatchamacallit in the sand or different things like that. But again, as an artist myself who has these type of songs, and if you're really trying to get your message to the people, it is difficult as well as, you know, um it's just a challenge. It is a challenge because a lot of times we can feel like it's falling on deaf ears. We get a lot of people like maybe an FD Signifier who appreciates us, who's just all like, yeah, you have my respect. I may have been to a couple of shows, I've financially given to you and anything like that. But the one thing that I do notice is when these artists kind of fall off the back end and different things like that, they don't get as much support when they're indie. Yes, artists, there's a lot that goes into behind to promoting, marketing, and having a big machine, a big push is all gravy. But if the true fans are there, especially in the age of social media, you know where are they at to continue to support? That way those messages, because as much as we love a good radical person, standing up to the system and everything like that, what I notice is a lot of people watch and support from the distance, but when those artists actually need help, when those radical artists get the consequences, so to speak, of doing that, a lot of the fan base falls silent. And I mean, the same sentiment may be said for a lot of the older artists. I think either FD Signifier or maybe a couple of other people were talking about, having something set up for the older artists so they're not just dwindling away. And even though they contributed so much to hip hop, so um can radical, hip hop. I mean, look, there was I'm gonna end it with this quote. And this was from my favorite book from James Baldwin that I've read a couple, but this one, well, it says that this was from a radio host that said this, but I remember reading The Fire Next Time. And I feel like even though I'm reading it from as far as this broadcast interview, I feel like an aspect of it was put in that book. But he said to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all of the time and in one's work, and I feel like that pretty much with the beginning quote from Yasin Bey and this one ending it out, it shows as far as like what we got going on here, and it's very interesting. So y'all let me know what y'all think in the comments and my thoughts and FD Signifier's thoughts in the comments. But hey, it's Mr. Composition MC that writes fiction back at it with another reaction. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, notification bells on so you don't miss when I drop a new video. On the road to 10K, make sure to check out the description for music, books, comics, and more. All right, y'all. Peace.